Okay, so Gartner, you fairly recently you conducted a study on data security, and I suppose it'd just be good to understand before we get into the findings, if you like, uh, the background of the survey, why particular data security, and I guess to that point, why is it so important at this moment in time, if you like?
Absolutely. So we believe that data security is top of mind for CISOs and other security leaders right now for a few reasons. Um, Firstly, the three V's of data, the volume, velocity, and variety of data, have been exponentially increasing for a while now. And due to this, security leaders are finding it more and more challenging to protect their organization's most sensitive data. There's just a lot more data than there used to be, frankly. Um, at the same time, right, creating value from the use of this data continues to be critical for organizations. Um, so it's both more challenging and more important for security leaders to think about data security as a priority of theirs in 2025. And I think a good example of this is generative AI adoption, right? I mean, obviously, this is top of mind for just about everybody right now. Um, and the way that generative AI adoption has been democratized and decentralized really gives security leaders some problems in terms of data security risk. Often, the use of these models is kind of a black box in terms of visibility for how security leaders are able to monitor the data that's being used um, and what that data is. So this is just one example that's pretty timely of why data security is a priority for folks. And we've been getting a lot of questions from our clients on how they can perform data security more effectively, specifically how they can balance this kind of protection of their sensitive data with this enablement of the business to use this data, whether for generative AI tools or other types of data driven value, right? So, to get to your point, to answer these questions, we conducted a survey. This comprised of 318 senior cybersecurity leaders. Um, and these folks were distributed across a wide range of regions and industries, with some of the top industries being manufacturing, banking, information technology, and healthcare. But we had representatives from many more industries here.
Okay, and I think you hinted there at one of the important sort of objectives and maybe findings of the report, is that a lot of security and risk management leaders they struggle to balance their data security objectives, which are potentially seen as conflicting, I guess. It'd just be good to understand, if you like, a bit about the challenges that they face, because I guess there's at one level the business wants to be agile, etc. But at the other, security people tend to think, it's a restriction on what they might want to get. Just, yeah, please give us some, fill in the details if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got it right. This is what we were really trying to test in the survey, right? Is how effective our respondents were at achieving these two main data security related goals. The first being protecting their organization's most sensitive data assets, and the second being enabling the business to actually make use of and share this data to achieve their business objective, which is the end goal of any organization, right? And so we tested the effectiveness of our respondents at both of these goals. And as you've hinted at, and as I've hinted at, we found that the situation really is quite dire. We found that 35% of our respondents were able to secure their organization's most sensitive data assets. Um, and separately, 21% of these respondents could enable the business to use data effectively. Um, but when we put these together, only 14% of our respondents were able to achieve both of these data protection and business enablement goals. So overall, less than 1 in 7 of our respondents were able to really run a well balanced data security program. And we felt that this was a big problem and something that we needed to provide some answers for to our client.
Yeah, which is a nice, if you like, segue to my next question, which was going to be having identified these potentially conflicting challenges, or at least, the overall challenge of securing the data, but also making it available for the business. What do you Gartner, what do you recommend that security risk management leaders do to meet both those objectives equally well, I guess?
So to answer this question, um, we examined the actions that security leaders who do effectively achieve both of these data security goals take, right? We looked at what they do, what they don't do, and with this information in mind, we created 5 recommendations that security leaders can implement within their cybersecurity programs in order to try and effectively achieve this kind of balance between their critical goals. So the first recommendation that we have, right, is to involve end users in the data security policy creation and updating process. And specifically, we found that security leaders who have a well-established process for this, right, um, are able to achieve their data security goals more effectively. So this means instead of having like ad hoc involvement of your business unit leaders and end users in getting their feedback in policy, you really have a comprehensive and intentional process in place to get the thoughts of these end users incorporated into policy. Um, and this allows security to reduce the friction created by policy, right? And really implement policy in a way that the business would like to work with it. We found that this action increases the ability of security leaders to achieve both of these goals by 35%. So folks who do have this process are 35% more likely to achieve both their protection and enablement goals. The second recommendation that we have here is to reconcile different data security related governance initiatives across all of the different internal functions that have a stake in data security governance. Data security governance, right, is something that a lot of different people have their hand in. Now, this could be cybersecurity, data and analytics, privacy, legal, and obviously the business. And we think that when each of these functions goes at it alone, there can be a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of overlaps, and a lot of governance frameworks and initiatives that are frankly redundant. And so we found that by partnering with other internal functions to identify these overlaps and eliminate these governance inefficiencies, security leaders were 22% more likely to achieve their data security goals in this kind of balanced way. So this is another really important kind of policy and governance related thing that security can do in order to have better data security. Third, kind of gets into the generative AI adoption that I touched on earlier, right? Obviously, this is something that security leaders need to pay attention to. And we found that the best way for them to be involved in generative AI adoption and other emerging technology adoption from a data security risk standpoint is to define high-level security guardrails around generative AI experimentation and experimentation with other emerging technologies. We found that defining these kind of few high altitude, non-negotiable things that the users in the business must adhere to when they're experimenting with new technologies actually gave the business a little bit more freedom to experiment as opposed to spending a lot of time and resources on a comprehensive kind of policy guidebook that may or may not be followed and would definitely not be relevant in 6 months' time. right? Just due to the increasing pace of change in this area. So we found that delineating these kind of non-negotiable requirements made security leaders 26% more likely to achieve their data security goals. And finally, we found that it's critical for security leaders who want a balanced data security program to work jointly with their data and analytics teams specifically to communicate the business value of data security initiatives to business stakeholders, whether this is the C-suite or the board even. We found that working jointly, not just closely or together with, but jointly with these data and analytics teams to secure this top-down buy-in and kind of present their data security story as to why this matters, resulted in leaders being 21% more likely to achieve their goals. So these are at a high level the recommendations that we have for security leaders who want to effectively achieve both their data protection and business enablement goals. And I know I've been talking for a while, so I'll pause here and ask if you have any questions on anything that I've said. If we want to double click on any of these recommendations, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. First up, I think a couple of the points you made referenced the need for some kind of collaboration. So I guess it would be good to understand. I know everyone talks about, traditionally the silos and how they need to come together, and not just security, but just generally for the betterment of the business, should we say? I mean, it's one thing to say that, but do you have any thoughts, I guess, as to how the security, the risk management leaders are the people that drive it, because they ultimately have the responsibility for data security. But how do they engage successfully other parts of the business, whether it's, you say, privacy, DNA, legal, I mean, almost any department potentially. But what can they do to best ensure that other folks go, yeah, okay, we're with you, as opposed to you're the guys that mess my day up kind of attitude, if you like?
That's a great question. And as you said, right, it can sometimes be a challenge for security leaders to present themselves as something else than like the office of no, as we like to call it at Gartner, right? Um, but I mean, it's undeniable that collaboration is really important if you want to run a business in today's day and age. And so we think that a few of our recommendations are to leverage collaboration in some kind of specific way for a clear end goal, right? So whether that's reconciling your governance by partnering with internal functions on this kind of governance cleanup and inefficiency elimination initiative, or whether it's working jointly with your data and analytics partners to clearly communicate your data security value story to the executive board. We think that it's important to collaborate intentionally, right? If cybersecurity leaders can work with other functions closely, but in specific targeted areas and for clear end goals, this is going to make their collaboration efforts that much more effective and well received, we think. When there's a clear plan and initiative in place, it can be much easier to work together.
Okay, and then the other thing that I guess my ears pricked up, and as you mentioned a couple of times, AI is here, there, everywhere. It's the topic of the moment, shall we say?
Right.
And Gen AI, I guess, even more specifically. I suppose I think you've vaguely hinted at, but perhaps if you want to say a bit more about the implications this has for security risk management leaders, and security is it completely move the goalpost? Is it just another little thing to consider? Just how big an impact, I guess, is AI having and potentially likely to have into the future?
Well, this is the elephant in the room, right? I mean, this is something that everybody's thinking about, and nobody quite knows what to do with yet, frankly. Um, as I mentioned before, right, that this kind of democratized and decentralized adoption that many organizations have seen with respect to their generative AI tools being used within their organization can present like a very big problem of limited visibility for CISOs and other security leaders. Um, I think that the real issue that security leaders need to focus on with respect to generative AI adoption is where they should focus their efforts, where both them as a leader and their function in cybersecurity should focus their efforts on generative AI adoption. Um, it's unreasonable, right, for security leaders to try and have their hand in every generative AI strategy decision, right? Even though that may be appealing because you want to have security get their say in, and you want to make sure these opinions are and priorities are being considered. Given the budgets and the headcounts of most security functions, like this is not going to be feasible. And they also shouldn't be doing this because it shouldn't be their first priority. So instead of trying to have a broad kind of influence over generative AI strategy, um, this survey has shown that it's more effective when security leaders focus their efforts where they have the most expertise and where their cybersecurity function is really the best suited for the job, right? For example, delineating non-negotiable security requirements, right, which I touched on earlier. This kind of security guardrail setting is something that is a specific action that security really objectively is the best suited to handle with respect to generative AI adoption. And so it's something that they can do very well that will have a high impact without wasting valuable time and resources. Similarly, uh, we found in this survey that when cybersecurity leaders are able to influence decision making on Gen AI related decisions, like when to pause or stop a tool or feature, kind of colloquially known as this kind of kill switch. We found that this is also results in security leaders being more effective at achieving their goals by a figure of 20%. So both these kind of non-negotiable security requirements and these kill switch decisions are, I think, really good examples of these specific areas where cybersecurity leaders can look to be involved in Gen AI strategy in order to maximize their impact without being spread too thin.
Okay, and maybe just finally, and this may be a bit of a red herring or not so easy to answer, but often when people are looking at introducing technology, they have the luxury, if you like, of choosing a particular project, kicking the tires, yeah, etc. It works here, then we'll roll it out here and here. With data security, I guess the gut instinct is to roll it out or improve it here, there, right across the organization. But is there potentially still an argument for certainly, say, when we come to the collaboration we talked about, choosing individual test cases, proving them, and then you can show them to the rest of the business that look, we're not asking everyone to collaborate straight away and you don't understand what we mean, but here we've collaborated with this department, this is how it works, success. Then that's why we're asking you to just your thoughts, I suppose, as to how much you just generally flood the organization with data security is important, this is what you need to do, as opposed to rolling out some specific projects. I don't know if that's easy to answer or not, but
So this is a really interesting question. And just to confirm, you're talking about data security more generally and not generative AI
yeah,
or a
I
specific
guess in
emerging
Gen AI's
technology,
case,
right?
that might be an obvious case where you could do a specific project because someone's using Gen AI, so you could use it, and then. But yeah, I'm talking more generally as to how much you just roll out across the organization, expect everyone to get on board, and how much you kind of pick a particular department, whatever it is, try and get them to understand the benefits, and then show and tell to everyone else, if you like.
So that's a really good question. And that's something that we didn't directly ask about in our survey, right? Like if this kind of what the implementation really should look like in terms of data security rollout. But I know, I mean, awareness is a big part of that, right? Creating a culture of awareness and transparency and trust within your organization and within the business to give security credibility and say like, hey, there's a reason that we're asking you to do these things, and you need to do them. And so this is an important thing, right, for security leaders across the board. In terms of interaction with the business, right? I'll reference again our first recommendation, right, which is to actually actively involve the business in the creation of some of these data security policies, as well as the continuous updating of them. Um, because at the end of the day, no one knows how these policies work better than the folks who interact with them and have to abide by them every day. And so to get that kind of uh, ground floor experience from these users who are actually interacting with these initiatives is really, really valuable, in terms of creating a good connection with the business and enabling them to achieve their objectives using data. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah,
that's what we found, certainly.
no, that's great. And maybe just the final one. You said that I think the stark finding was only 14% of organizations manage both sort of data security from a security perspective, but also a business enabling equally successfully. Um, is that genuine? Do you know if that is generally even, or do people have to accept an element of compromise along the way, or can you generally sort of have as good a security as you can hope for, alongside complete business agility and freedom, or do you? Back to your, drawing up policies, just occasionally you have to just say, we like the idea of that, but you know, security wise, we're just going to have to, you know, put our foot down. I don't know if that, again, if that makes sense or not.
That's a good question. Yes, that does make sense. Right. And again, this isn't something that we directly tested, right? It would be difficult to test. But I don't think, I think our sentiment is that this is not like a zero sum balance, right? I think that the prevailing sentiment can be that you can't have both of these goals, and fully achieve them, right? The sentiment can be that they're sometimes seemingly in conflict with each other, and we don't think that's the case. We think that often, if data security leaders are able to implement these actions that I've spoken about, and effectively work with the business in targeted ways, work with their partner functions in targeted ways, and focus their efforts where they have the most impact, it will result in a better data security program that's also able to adapt and be agile to the business's changing needs. And so I think, to answer your question, like, these principles that we've outlined are things that will help both increase the soundness of your data protection and allow the business to work, with the freedom that they'd like to have.
Okay. No, I mean, it's been tremendous to chat to you and some brilliant insights as to the survey and more generally as to, thoughts as to how people can balance. Obviously, it's a delicate balance, but there's a way forward. So, Nathan, really appreciate the time you've given me. Thanks. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.